In 1967, a black and gold Chevrolet Chevelle rolled onto Daytona, carrying an engine that should have been at a disadvantage. It wasn't the biggest motor in the garage. It wasn't a factory-backed showpiece. And yet, with Curtis Turner behind the wheel, it produced a qualifying speed that stunned NASCAR. At the center of it all was Smokey Yunick's 404 cubic inch Chevrolet V8, an engine created not by breaking the rulebook, but by reading it more carefully than almost anyone else. To understand why the 404 mattered, you have to go back to the early 1960s, when Chevrolet was fighting for survival in American stock car racing. Its old 409W head V8 had been a serious weapon, but Ford and Pontiac were moving fast, and the 409 was beginning to show its age. Chevrolet needed something new. Inside Chevrolet engineering, a secret project was already taking shape, led by engineers including Dick Kyneth. With the influence of Corvette legend Zora Arkus Duntov, the program produced what became known as the Mystery Motor. Internally, it was the Mark II. It shared the 409's 4.84-inch bore spacing. But beyond that, it was a different animal, a 427 cubic inch V8 built around a new approach to airflow, cylinder head design, and high-performance durability. Then, in 1963, General Motors officially pulled back from factory racing. The project did not simply disappear. Its ideas lived on, eventually influencing Chevrolet's later big block family. By the middle of the decade, the 396 had arrived, followed by the 427. These engines used the famous staggered valve, or porcupine, cylinder head layout, with large valves positioned at angles to help the engine breathe more efficiently. On paper, the 1966 427 was rated at 425 horsepower. It used huge 2.190-inch intake valves and 1.720-inch exhaust valves, and for most builders, 427 cubic inches looked like the obvious answer. NASCAR allowed up to 427 cubic inches, so why would anyone voluntarily run less? Smokey Yunick had an answer. He looked at the 427's 3.76-inch stroke and saw stress. At sustained high RPM, piston speed climbed, connecting rods worked harder, and bearings endured more punishment. Daytona was not a drag strip. The engine had to survive long periods at enormous speed, so Smokey went the other way. He destructed the big block to 404 cubic inches. The smaller displacement gave up some low-end torque, but it allowed the engine to rev harder and survive longer. Smokey used aluminum rods, carefully balanced the rotating assembly, and optimized cooling. The result was a big block built for sustained speed rather than brute force acceleration. By the winter of 1965, his association with the Chevelle became direct when his friend Bunky Knudsen, then head of Chevrolet, asked him to prepare the new muscle car for Daytona. That engine became the heart of an even more controversial machine, Smokey's 1966 Chevelle. The legend says the car was built at 7/8 scale. The exact claim remains debated, but the modifications were still extreme. The body was subtly narrowed, the roofline lowered, and protruding edges cleaned up so it could move through the air, while still looking like a stock Chevelle. And Smokey was thinking about something most teams barely considered at the time: the air underneath the car. The factory underbody was full of exposed structure, frame rails, and aerodynamic drag. Smokey raised the floor, tucked the frame higher into the body, and created an unusually smooth underside. From the side, it still looked like a Chevelle. Underneath, it was something far more deliberate. Then came the fuel system. NASCAR limited fuel tank capacity to 22 gallons, and Smokey's tank met that limit. But the rules did not clearly limit the fuel line's length or diameter. He installed a line roughly 2 inches wide and about 11 feet long, giving the car several extra gallons without enlarging the tank. This was Smokey's philosophy in its purest form. If the rulebook did not say you could not do something, he believed you could. The Chevelle first appeared at Daytona in 1966, with Mario Andretti behind the wheel. Andretti found the car brutally difficult to drive. The low center of gravity, stiff setup, and aggressive power delivery made it razor-sharp and unforgiving. He crashed early, but the car had already shown enough speed to get everyone's attention. A year later, Curtis Turner took over. Turner was one of stock car racing's most fearless characters, a driver whose aggressive style matched the personality of Smokey's machine. During 1967 Daytona qualifying, Turner drove the black and gold Chevelle to 180.831 miles per hour. For a mid-size Chevrolet, the number was shocking. Suddenly, the car was not just a curiosity, it was a threat. Ford and Chrysler had massive engineering programs, yet Smokey Yunick, working from his Daytona garage, had produced a car capable of challenging factory-backed machinery with an engine smaller than the maximum allowed. That was the real danger of the 404. It was not deadly because NASCAR feared it would explode. It was dangerous because it threatened the balance of the sport. The 404 could live at higher RPM, while larger big blocks were under greater mechanical stress. Over 500 miles, that mattered. If Smokey's combination proved both faster and more durable, rival manufacturers could find themselves spending millions to chase an independent builder who had simply interpreted the rules differently. NASCAR depended on keeping those manufacturers involved. The conflict reached its most famous moment in the inspection area. Officials went through Smokey's Chevelle piece by piece. They objected to the frame, the floor, the body dimensions, and other details. Eventually, the fuel tank was removed. According to the famous story, an inspector told Smokey there were 10 things wrong with the car and that he could not race it. Smokey climbed into the Chevelle anyway. With the fuel tank still removed, he fired the engine, using the gasoline trapped in that enormous fuel line. Then he reportedly answered, "Well, you better make it 11." Drove the car away, and returned to his garage. Whether you admired him or hated what he represented, the message was impossible to miss. Smokey had found another gap in the rules. By this point, the battle was no longer simply Smokey versus rival teams. It was Smokey versus NASCAR's ability to control its own rulebook. The 404 was under the maximum displacement limit, but NASCAR tightened the language around what engines were allowed. Production dimensions mattered more. Bore and stroke combinations became restricted, and unusual internal combinations began disappearing. A 404 cubic inch Chevrolet big block was not something a customer could walk into a dealership and buy. That gave NASCAR the opening it needed. By 1968, the original 404 concept had effectively been pushed out. Smokey later experimented with a destroked 416 cubic inch version, trying again to stay inside the changing regulations. But the Chevelle itself faced relentless scrutiny. Aerodynamic changes, frame geometry, body measurements, and interpretation of inspection points all became reasons to keep the car off the track. The result was a strange defeat. The 404 was never given a full championship season. It never had the chance to build the long record of wins, poles, and statistics that usually define a legendary NASCAR engine. Its reputation came from flashes of speed, technical controversy, inspection stories, and the rules that followed. And that may be its most important legacy. Smokey Yunick had built his career in the gray areas. He had found speed in Hudson's, helped prove Chevrolet's small block in NASCAR, worked with Pontiac, and repeatedly saw performance where others saw limits. A World War II combat pilot, crew chief, inventor, and journalist, he became one of American motorsport's most relentless mechanical thinkers. The Chevelle became a rolling summary of that entire philosophy. Narrow the body if the measurements allowed it. Change the undercarriage if the rules did not forbid it. Use taller tires if only width was regulated. Make the fuel line longer if tank capacity was the only thing specified. Each time Smokey found daylight, NASCAR eventually closed it. Body templates became stricter. Fuel system rules became more specific. Engine configurations became more standardized. Ambiguity, once a playground for builders like Smokey, became something NASCAR increasingly tried to eliminate. That is why the 404 still matters. It never became a dynasty engine or dominated a decade, but it helped push NASCAR toward the tightly controlled, specification-driven world that followed. Its influence survives less in hardware than in rules designed to prevent another engine like it. The Chevelle itself survived, After its NASCAR life ended, it reportedly raced briefly on dirt tracks. Years later, Smokey repossessed the car and restored it, using original spare parts he had made during the 1960s. That makes the surviving Chevelle far more than a tribute. It is one of the most direct physical links to NASCAR's rule-bending era. And that leaves the biggest question. Was Smokey Yunick cheating, or was he simply competing more intelligently than the people writing the rules? The 404 never lost because it proved too slow. It disappeared because the environment around it changed. NASCAR decided that unrestricted interpretation carried too much risk for competition, for manufacturer support, and for the stability of the sport itself. Maybe that decision protected NASCAR. Maybe it also ended part of its wildest creative era. Either way, Smokey Yunick's 404 cubic inch Chevelle remains one of the great what-ifs in stock car history. A machine remembered not for the championship it won, but for the rules it helped change. If stories like this are why you love automotive history, subscribe to Engine Edge. There are plenty more forgotten machines, outlaw ideas, and engineering battles still waiting to be uncovered.